first, when I was first reading it, I was kind of, my denial mechanism set in. And since it didn't say that he had died, only that he had been shot in the head, I figured, oh, he's still alive. Maybe he'll be all right. And that continued. Then I saw it on the news, and they talked about the shooting at the same time as they ran a videotape of him talking, and so that kind of lent it like an air of unreality to hear them talking about someone that was dead and seeing him look so alive on the video. But they announced that he was dead, so kind of accepted it there.
This film should be the story of the center of the progressive community in Chapel Hill, and how it came to be, and how it was shut down after Bob was killed, and how it rose like a phoenix from the ashes.
Chapel Hill, I had picked out, I wanted to look at College Park, I wanted to look at Charlottesville, and I looked at Chapel Hill. I wanted to move south. I wanted to get out of the upstate New York cold, long winters. And one day I remember reading in an almanac or something that Orange County had gone from a governor like 74% over Nixon. And I said, geez, because I was scared about moving south. I mean, there was tales of the South. When you lived up north, the South had all these connotations of rednecks and but when I saw that, that was like one of the higher percentages in the country I'd gone from, and I thought, that definitely there was a difference between George McGovern's attitude about life and politics and Richard Nixon's. And I met some people who had been through Chapel Hill before, and they said it was a good town. And they said, and this is the way it was back in the late, say, mid-70s or so, I was told I would meet people that I knew. Not that I was going to know them personally, but I was going to meet people that I would feel comfortable with. And I came down here with my ponytail and my beard, and within 3 days I was put up at someone's house for a month, and I was taken in by other people that I knew. I mean, I didn't know them before I met them, but as soon as I met them, it was like, yeah.
Would have been sometime about 77 or 78 or so. Only knew him as Commie Bob then, with his red beret and his red star stuck on it. He was giving talks, speeches, harangues on the steps of Lenore Hall in the pit on campus.
But in those days we had, the street people were like artists and poets and and writers and philosophers, and you hang out on the park bench with them and you learn something. And that, I think those people were kind of alienated, or a lot of them probably, said the hell with it and got jobs.
When you would see Bob on the steps in front of the in front of Lenore Hall in the pit, it was kind of one of those deals where there could be an evangelical preacher on one side of the pit and a man who saw visions and considered himself a modern-day prophet and a reinterpreter of the Bible on one side of the pit, and Bob talking on another side, and there were often days where if you wanted to be heard in the pit,
it was a question of volume.
It was a question of volume. I mean, it was kind of a Hyde Park kind of scene in a way.
One day he was in my store and told me about some cheap, inexpensive stores that were opening up downtown in Chapel Hill, and it intrigued me that there were some rents that were $125 a month for a store, and I was overcrowded in my store, and I was thinking about opening up another store, and I did. Next to Bob was opening up the Internationalist on Henderson Street, and I moved in shortly after he opened up, and that's when I got to know Bob. I mean, I kind of knew him just as a person that came in my store before as a customer, and then I got to know him as we were fellow store owners over this bar.
Yeah, in fact, I was working at a restaurant right kind of downstairs from where the Internationalist originally was. And I would go up there and hang out every once in a while.
And what did you think about Bob when you first met him?
When I first met him?
Yeah.
I found him engaging.
What do you mean?
He liked to talk, and he liked other people's opinions. And I found fun hanging out with him. That's why I went up there.
It was up here on Henderson Street. There was a room about as big as your closet.
Small room. I remember maybe the first time going in there, sometime in the late 70s, going in the store when he was just trying to get it off the ground and thinking, I don't know if this is going to make it. There was certainly literature in there that I'd never seen before, didn't know existed. Didn't have time to read it all. Wondered how Bob did, but kind of wasn't sure it was going to make it.
But it did.
Yeah.
I think what added to that, to the skepticism of how it would make it was Bob's willingness to let you hang out and read or even borrow. Bob was always good for that. He did take a real generous approach to his literature.
That we had a store to operate, and he'd ask me suggestions, and I'd ask him suggestions, and we would talk about our landlord, and he thought it was pretty funny that he was upstairs over a bar run by a former UNC football player, and I thought that was funny too. And in between our two stores, there was a hallway, and in between our two stores was a hairdressing outfit. And so the people that were coming upstairs was we had quite a mix. We had preppy kids coming up there to get their hair done, and we had long hairs. We had the radicals. We had some of the street people that would just come up and hang out. And through all this, with the smell of permanence would be, and music coming out of all three stores. Different. I don't know if Bob had music or not. Yeah, he had music in his store. He had small music. The hairdressers had some music coming out, and I had a record store at the end of the hall, and I had music coming out. It was a three-ring circus.
I found what I was looking for. I was looking for a good, liberal, I don't know, a crazy bookstore, a place that had books that I hadn't already read, or would be interested in reading. And he was always he was sitting there talking to someone, and then when they left, he came over and talked to me, and we talked about books, and different books that we'd both read, and he was, pulling books off and showing them to me. Oh, you'd love this one, and just getting really into it, and I think the thing that I remember most about the Internationalist is that, I never went there to look at books really after that. I just went to talk, because it was fun. And I learned more about books that way than I would have. I could never have read them all,
He wasn't objective. He didn't pretend to be objective. Bob would let you know, I believe in this, I believe in this. I respect your opinion. You can talk to me. You can tell me what you believe in, your politics, and I'll I will respectfully disagree with you. And he took a stand and he held his ground. Whereas many professors that teach social sciences or any course having to do with very real situations of poverty, exploitation, militarism, they toe a fine line between what they believe and what they're allowed to say in a university setting. And I think Bob was just a person that knew how to motivate people.
I came in, and the first night he made me a cup of coffee and sat me down on the porch and said, "So, are you a feminist?" And I said, "Well, yeah." I was younger at the time. He's like, "Well, what sort of feminist are you?" And it reminds me of The Wizard of Oz. Are you a good feminist or a bad feminist? And he went through this whole series of questions, which, you know, you grow up and you think, oh, I'm for equal rights, I'm a feminist. And he was like, well, what do you think of Marxism? Well, do you think Sandra Day O'Connor is a feminist? Well, do you think women working their way into the military is a good feminist thing to do? And I was going, well, no, well, I mean, women should, well, I'm going to have to rethink this, aren't I, Bob?
At the Y, you know, there would be Bob, you know, commiserating with a middle-aged housewife about racquetball technique or aerobics technique, you know, and Bob was, seeing Bob in aerobics was always a hoot. Bob, he'd usually be the only male in there, and there's Bob doing this, hopping around, you know, and you'd think, geez, what kind of communist is this? but the point is that Bob could talk to anybody, but he didn't necessarily choose to.
Bob never forced an opinion down your throat. I mean, we would have arguments about things sometimes during some of the first of the peace movement in the student groups, and he was concerned about some of the peace groups not going far enough, you know, and we would argue back and forth about some of that, but it was never him trying to change our minds or anything like that, just trying to explain his perspectives on it and that sort of thing, and they were very friendly arguments.
Well, it was important to me when he was alive, just as, not even as a bookstore, because I mean, I knew I could get those books cheaper elsewhere because I worked in a bookstore, you know. But not even as a bookstore, but just as a place where that kind of thinking was open and encouraged, and you could talk about things and really think about things, like more so than I ever did in a college class, you know, or that kind of thing. And that was really important to me, and that's why I work there, because I want that to still be there, I guess.
I think if you were feeling down, if you were taking a class and you felt that you weren't getting the whole picture, or you were told you were getting the whole picture, and you really didn't believe that, Internationalist Books was always a place to go and say, Bob, you know, I'm taking this class, look, this is a syllabus we're using, and is there any other literature that you could show me so I could compare to what I'm being fed in the university?
I grew up in a really small town where there were no books available, and I just fell in love with this place. I mean, the first time I was here, as in high school, and Bob was a lot of fun to be around. You get to know the other volunteers. There's a real sense of community. I love books, and I think having seen a lot of political movements, and you have people and they're standing up and they're spending 4 minutes telling people what they should think, you've got a book. And I really think books are one of the best, in particular fiction, which a lot of the professors on campus use here, can be a real force for social change. And because it makes someone sit down and put themselves in another person's shoes. I mean, that's really how writing, literature, nonfiction works. I mean, you're submerged. That's what you're connected with when you're reading.
I think that Internationalist Books provides a hub for the progressive community here. I think it provides, you know, a center for culture and politics, and a space that people can have access to this information and to this spirit that they don't have in other places, even in Chapel Hill.
But one of the things that made Bob effective, though, was the fact that he was listened to not because he yelled the loudest or because he did have any flamboyance to his style, but it was because he knew what the fuck he was saying, and he was prepared, which is why
and Bob
so
knew
many
when
of us,
he wasn't prepared.
Right.
Also, and he went and he asked other people about a situation. He knew that he needed to be, you know, this might not be the right choice of words, but he knew that he needed to be well armed politically, and he knew when he wasn't. Mm-hmm. He deferred to people who obviously were.
Among the many conversations Bob and I had since I was doing the internship as someone interested in a store was the store, and why Bob opened it, and why it was here. And it wasn't a business, it was a mission. It was, this information needs to be available. It was taking the most marginalized issues and people and thoughts and feelings and making them available. It was affirming when you come in here and you find something that you connect with. You're a black woman and you come in and you find a book of writing by black women. It's affirming to you. And that, and you know, disseminate information, keep the revolution going, communication.
Bob was trying to, I guess, change the world, you know, by being a nice guy, you know, and helping out and not just, I mean, he was pro-abortion, right? I'm pro-abortion. All of my friends are pro-abortion, basically, but he worked at an abortion clinic, you know, and he would actually talk to those people and, you know, the people coming in for abortions, and I think about that, you know, of all the people I know that have had that experience and how much easier it would have been for them if Bob Sheldon had been the guy they were talking to instead of those, you know, stupid counselors they usually give you know. And, I mean, he made a lot of people's lives a lot easier just by being around.
Because he wasn't a saint. But I don't know, I don't think that people feel the same kind of connection to saints as a lot of us felt for Bob. He was really down to earth, but that he did a lot of really great things.
But beyond that, the guy was no saint. You know, Bob had plenty of enemies in this town, and not just political enemies. Well, I shouldn't say enemies. I mean, there were people that didn't like Bob the same way there are people that don't like all of us. You know, Bob rubbed people the wrong way sometimes. He could be brusque. And again, I think that detracts from what he did to try and get this impression of Bob as a guy that was so universally revered by the people on the left is a misconception. And it does take away something from what he did. A lot of what he did was about rubbing people the wrong way.
Yeah, you know, and as far as day-to-day life goes, you know, you didn't exactly jump for joy when Bob came and sat down in your section when you were waiting tables.
Bob was not a great tipper.
Not a great tipper. He was a sitter.
Drank cheap beer.
Cheap beer, many cups of coffee.
He knew a bargain when
he knew a bargain, and he didn't jump for joy when he sat in your section.
I mean, I look up there and I realize that there's something going on, and I hear someone says that Bob's been beat up, and I said, oh. And it looked like there was a lot of people around.
I was working at Breadman's down the street, and Tom came in to have dinner, and he was sitting there, and he mentioned that there were a lot of police cars in front of Internationalist. And the first thing that crossed my mind was that the store had been robbed, or else the police were harassing Bob for some other reason. And I asked him if he would go over, since he had a press pass, and see if he could find out what was going on for me, and he said that he would.
When we drove by, there were a whole bunch of flashing lights that had the yellow tape up, a lot of police, people standing around. And Leslie, who works down at Breadman's, had noticed this and was worried because she knew Bob. She volunteers there sometimes. And she knew I was with the press, and she had this mistaken idea that if you're with the press and you go up and talk to the police, they'll tell you what's going on. Ha! And especially at a crime scene. And she asked if I would go over and see if I could find out what was going on. And I knew I really couldn't find out much of anything, but I was kind of curious, and it gave me an excuse to go. So I went over and stood around and watched police do official things for a little while. And then I went and hung out in the skylight for a little while until I found somebody who knew basically what had happened, which is that something which nobody knew much about. It happened inside the skylight earlier that evening, and that Bob Sheldon was in the hospital seriously injured. And that's about as much as anybody knew then.
I'm interested, and I hate to see, wonder how bad Bob's got beat up or whatever. And by this time, the ambulance was there, and they were loading him into the ambulance, and I heard he was shot. Police weren't talking. I remember asking a cop that I kind of even recognized. They weren't saying anything. You knew it was real serious, real quick. There was these faces on a lot of people. I mean, there's so many cops around, and dogs, and someone said, "Come on up to the hospital. Let's go up to the hospital and see how he's doing." So I accidentally, I found out about it immediately, and I happened to be at the hospital, and most of the night.
At that point, found out that Bob had been shot, and went over to Richard and Laura's and spent the night over there, and we were on the phone off and on with Michael Wade, and so it kind of came out in little bits and pieces. We found out that he had been shot in the head. Then we found out that he was going into surgery, and then about 3:15, Michael called us and told us that they didn't expect Bob to live through the night, and that they weren't going to take any measures to try and keep him alive, and that Marilyn and he were going to be in there with them.
Anyway, Beth was trying to find out whether he was dead or not, because she kept hearing from people, like Grant Kornberg stopped by and said, "He's dead." All of Bob's friends had been told that he was dead, and the hospital, she couldn't get information out of them. When you call up to get a condition, there are like 3 or 4 words that you get: stable, fair, critical might be one of them. He was listed as stable, and I think what had happened was that his body was being kept on life support, kept stable, even though he was brain dead, for organ transplant purposes.
Again, saying, well, I mean, the good news is it's over.
And it was cold that weekend. It was cold that night. I remember thinking of Gil Scott Heron's Winter in America that night, because it seemed like it was really winter in America.
I was at the Peace Camp on campus. It was during the time of the war. It was a couple days before the ground war. It was Friday afternoon. It must have been about noon. And I was standing by the lit table there, just checking in like I always did, because I was part of that, that movement on campus. And a friend of mine, Savati, said, "Did you hear Bob Sheldon was shot last night?" And I just, it was one of those situations where all your blood kind of rushed to your head, and I just kind of, I couldn't hear or anything. I just was shaken. I was just in shock for a long time.
Saturday night was a cold Saturday night, and there was a memorial service in front of the store, just a candlelight vigil. I remember standing there for a while, and then at the community church. That was the crowd up at the community church. It made you feel good about being part of the community. Everything took on all this more than Bob. It was Bob, and then it was more than Bob, because the war was starting, the land war had started, the Iraqi, this whole war machine thing, and the anti-war feeling, and people coming together as, Bob brought a lot of people together, and his death brought more people together, and it was a time when we needed to be together because of the war and because of his death, and it was a time that we needed to be together.
the war was, of course, on, and the war got moved down the page, and Bob Sheldon's murder got put up above it. We didn't know it was a murder or killing. I guess until you know what the reason was, it's not a murder.
Who do you think killed Bob?
Some nobody,
Why do you think they killed him?
because they're scared.
Or what?
Of life. I think that there was someone desperate and afraid. Didn't know what they were doing and did it.
But, you know, there's always that possibility that it did have some kind of political motivation, and it can't be ruled out. When it first happened, Maria and I were talking, and it seemed in some ways that it would be almost easier to think that it was politically motivated. I mean, that it would in some way make it, I don't know, a more noble death or something ridiculous like that. I mean, I think that for a lot of people, it seemed almost like that they wanted really strongly for that to be true instead of just some kind of mindless killing. But, I mean, it's mindless no matter what.
Well, I feel like that we don't have any idea whether or not Bob was killed for political reasons. And beyond that, I think that that it's dangerous and it's reckless to assume that Bob was killed for political reasons. I think it does damage to this environment, meaning the internationalist environment. It does some damage to the community as a whole to just recklessly throw out accusations of a political assassination. I think that what it does is it suggests that something sinister took place. And my feeling is that Bob was always very out front in his political activities. And I think it does damage to his reputation to make unfounded accusations of a political assassination when they're made. Now, certainly it should be explored, and perhaps that will prove to be the case, but we don't know.
See, I don't, myself, I feel that it's a botched. I want to feel it was a botched robbery. That it's someone saw a possibility for some money, and that's what I kind of thought for a long time. And I don't buy in. I don't buy conspiracies real quick. I don't buy, you know. But as long as this has gone on, I mean, the more I'll give credence to the idea that he was shot, he was killed for maybe political reasons. But originally, I just said to myself, it's a botched problem.
If somebody shot a good friend of mine and I had no reason, no idea about why that person was shot, it would worry me. I think some people may have taken conspiracy theories a little bit too far, but when there's not too much else to replace that, what are you going to say?
We were told robbery, even though the police at the time didn't know there was money missing.
The war had brought out more bigotry and hatred than I had thought this country really. You know, I'm pretty naive sometimes. I want to be idealistic, and I want to be, you know. But this war brought out a bad side, I think, of this country. And the more I kept seeing of that, the more I saw the possibility that, I mean, the more I started to believe that there were these people out there that would kill somebody because they spoke out against the war, because they spoke about conscientious objection, because of they were a symbol of something that wasn't their brand of Americanism.
Sometimes I think, you know, where it was and what it was next to, and you know, the desperate people I see walking around all the time. You know, sometimes I think it could have been them, those desperate people. I know people that are certainly capable of doing that, you know, and poor enough. But I also, that wasn't very much money, you know. And anyone who was going to kill him for political reasons would have had sense enough to take a cash box, you know. I don't know. I don't think I'll ever know for sure. I mean, it's not like those organizations don't exist. And it's not like they wouldn't have hated Bob Sheldon. It's not like they wouldn't have seen him as a threat to their way of lives, you know.
Well, a lot of people said, well, maybe it wasn't the Klan, and maybe it wasn't a neo-Nazi, or maybe it wasn't some fanatic racist that saw Bob speaking out against the invasion of Iraq and Kuwait. Maybe it wasn't that, and boy, we'll be relieved if it wasn't that. Maybe it was just some drug addict, or some homeless person, or somebody that was hungry. And the way I look at it is, if it was a person that was hungry, if it was a drug addict that needed money for a fix, that's a political action in itself. It's poverty, drug addiction, social problems that aren't adequately addressed by a government, by a responsible government. Those are manifestations of severe social and political problems in society. And for me, a drug addict going into a store and killing someone is just as political as a purely political assassination. The objectives may be different, but you can't depoliticize hunger or drug addiction or child abuse or any other problem in society.
Say someone coming off the street from just a block or two up, and it was some kind of crack murder or someone needing money. You've got to you get to realize that there are underlying political, economic reasons behind that kind of thing. If in fact it was something like that, if there's a you know, Reaganomics have forced people to do some incredibly desperate things, and will continue to. So political, well, depends on, you know, you're going to have to define political. Is political just the wide dark sea that all people swim in? Well, yes, then it was probably political.
Chapel Hill isn't safe. Chapel Hill has this reputation of being an island of liberalism in North Carolina. But it's not safe here. We have Klan activity, we have neo-Nazi activity, we have skinhead activity. And Bob's death has just, I guess, taught me that you have to, not only do you have to struggle in South Africa, in Nicaragua, you have to struggle in Chapel Hill. Yes, there was a period of mourning, but I like to think that Bob has gone somewhere where there isn't racism, and you know, where there isn't exploitation, and where people help each other out on a daily basis. So that's for me, that's very inspirational, very positive. Bob taught many people a lot of things, and now they're putting them into practice. So I'm very sad that he's no longer with us. But I think Bob would want the mourning to stop and the action to begin.
It reaffirmed my commitment to what I'm doing, that it is a lifelong commitment, and that the more important it is, the more important it is the thing that you're doing, the more important it is that you not be silenced, and that when someone attempts to silence you, all the more reason that you have to be stronger and speak out even louder. That's what it reminded me.
We were already talking. I mean, I was over at Laura and Riston's and Richard's, who all volunteer here, the day after Bob died, and we were already talking, how are we going to keep the store open? What if the store closes? How are we going to scrape up the capital to start another one? I mean, so I was in very logical mode and already thinking the store has to stay open, that has to happen, and how are we going to do it? And
it's obvious to me the place had to stay open, that a bullet wasn't going to stop the information.
I think that there's a lot of things that are wrong with this country and with this world, and I think that it's people's responsibility to step forward and to take a stand and to say why that's wrong and to envision a better future and to say how that future can come about.
Bob's work can be done by other people. To recognize that to fail to recognize that he was an average guy like the rest of us, who just happened to be a guy who was extremely committed, determined, hardworking, is dangerous. We need to see that. It's something. It's escapism. You know, it's saying, oh, I couldn't do what Bob did. He was way up here, but he wasn't. And I think it's important to see that what made Bob as effective as he was just that he worked his ass off, and he cared. He never ceased to care.
The store is here because there isn't another place like it. And I think some people have made it out to be more important now that Bob is gone than it was before, or maybe it's just that they've realized, you know, that they kind of took it for granted before, and now they realize how important it is to them, or what a hole it would be if it wasn't here anymore.
The fact that the bookstore is running again is a testament to our strength.
Bob's death brought a lot of people together. People that hadn't seen each other for two years, a year. And now I'm seeing a lot of these people coming back, questioning their principles, questioning why they left, why they stopped working, why they stopped attending activities and talks and speeches.
At Chapel Hill, sometimes forget that it's a community, and that we need places like the Internationalist bookstore where people with like interests and stuff can come, and not just to buy books, but to meet other people and to know that they're also part of the community. I mean, Chapel Hill's a transient town, and and people are in and out of here quick. But so you have to find those places and know that you are welcome. Like I said, when I first moved to Chapel Hill, I met some people quickly that I knew. And I didn't know their names or anything like that, but I felt as though I knew them pretty quick. And a lot of times you can go into the Internationalist, and I think you can, come into this store sometimes, and you can feel like you know some people, even if you don't know their names. And there is a community in Chapel Hill. I just think we should be more aware of it and try to, work on it, work with it. That's about it. And Bob was fun to be around.
I think that there's probably a very definite attitude that, well, this happened in Chapel Hill. Of course it happened in Chapel Hill. These things happen in Chapel Hill. And that people will fail to realize that these things happen everywhere. And that all sorts of things that happen in Chapel Hill can, do, and will happen anywhere. That the threat of this type of thing, whether it be political or otherwise, is the same threat that exists all over. this is not just a Chapel Hill thing that happened.
This is a song that this is one of Bob's favorite songs. This is a Phil Oakes song, and Bob used to come to hear me play and always say, "Play Phil Oakes songs." And I would go to on a night when I'd be playing, I'd go by the Internationalist and say, "Well, you come to hear me play?" He goes, "Well, you gonna play any Phil Oakes songs tonight?" I said, "Okay, I'll play some Phil Oakes." So basically, I learned a bunch of Phil Oakes songs because of Bob, and I mean, I like Phil Oakes too. Bob was the only person I know who ever actually saw Phil Oakes in concert. So he was my last contact with Phil Oakes. Sit by my side, come as close as the air, sharing the memory of grace, and wander in my world, dream about the pictures that I play, of changes. Green leaves of summer turn red in the fall, to brown and to yellow they fade, and then they have to die, trapped within the circle time parade of changes. Scenes of my young years were warm in my mind, visions of shadows that shine, till one day I returned and found they were the victims of the vine of changes. The world spinning madly, it drifts in the night, swings through a hollow of haze, a race around the stars, a journey through the universe ablaze with changes. Moments of magic will glow in the night, all fears of the forest are gone, but when the morning breaks, they're trapped again in golden drops of dawn and changes. Passions may part to a strange melody, as fires will often burn cold, like petals in the wind, we're puppets in the silver strings of souls and changes. Your tears, they are trembling now, where somewhere else. One last cup of wine we will pour, and I'll kiss you one more time and leave you on the rolling river shore of changes. So sit by my side, come as close as the air, sharing the memory of grace, and wander in my world, dream about the pictures that I play of changes.